Hey there, true crime fans. Welcome back to For Criming Out Loud. This is our Crime Me to Sleep bedtime series, and this is episode 4 of Buried Beneath the Boarding House. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe, and that way you can go into the playlist and start any of our books right from the beginning. Let's get into episode 4 of Buried Beneath the Boarding House. Checks and balances. With a little money in her pocket, Dorothea rented a small apartment in a bad part of Los Angeles, fully expecting to pick up her career as a lady of the night from where she'd left off in a much busier city with considerably more traffic. Unfortunately, 1948 was not as good a year for prostitution as 1945 had been, with everyone working diligently to settle back into their post-war lives. More pressingly for Dorothea, at the age of 19, after birthing 2 babies and eating like only those who grew up with no access to food could, she found out that she couldn't draw in men the way she used to. She wasn't unattractive by any stretch of the imagination, and she was now settling into her assumed Mexican accent more comfortably, but she had lived a hard life, and it was rapidly catching up to her. By the start of the new year, to supplement her dwindling takings as a lady of the night, she began stealing from her clients when she followed them home from the bars of L.A. If she could avoid sleeping with her clients and exposing herself to the entailed risks, she would simply slip into their checkbooks from their pockets while they were fumbling with her over her dress. If she did make it as far as their homes, she would ply them with as much liquor as possible to avoid S, or to ensure they passed out as quickly as possible afterwards, so that she could ransack the place for any cash, checks, or valuables lying around. Her success as a thief was comparable to her success as a lady of the night, a run of extremely good luck and timing that ran out almost as soon as it had started. In early 1949, the police began to receive reports from bemused bartenders about a young woman who was doing the rounds, robbing johns and writing bad checks. Sitting in a bar getting hit on by young women was the kind of duty that almost every man of the LAPD was quick to volunteer for, and within a week of the first report coming in, Dorothea was arrested for fraud, if not the initial thefts. With her being so young, the judge was fairly lenient. She was sentenced to a year in prison with the possibility of parole after 6 months. It was still a terrible shock to the system for the girl, who was, for all her airs and graces, still only 19 years old. Prison conveyed to Dorothea that a whole marriage to Fred McFowle had failed to drum in. The first time that her cell was allowed to degenerate into filth, she was written up and punished. Worse yet, her fellow prisoners looked down their noses at her in contempt. These women, upon whom Dorothea looked as little better than dirt, treated her as if she were less than them because of her lack of cleanliness. It was the shock that she needed to change her attitude. From that moment on, her cell was the best kept in the whole prison. She had no interest in being a better person, but the thought of being perceived as less than others was enough to spur her into action. Since leaving her family, Dorothea had very deliberately isolated herself from the society around her. She had no friends, and her interactions outside of her husband and his immediate family were limited to the practicalities. In prison, she began to realize the potential of relationships, both as a means of getting what she wanted and as a source of ego affirmation. In the face of mounting evidence that her looks were rapidly fading, she now found that she could instead allocate value to herself based on the number of people who liked her. Of course, the people with whom she was forming these relationships were often hardened criminals, many of whom were just as manipulative as Dorothea herself, lacking her natural absence of empathy, but experienced in the art of deception. Still, as she spun the same old lies, refining and perfecting them with time until the whole story of her journey from Mexico to the Philippines, the rescue from the death march by a valiant young soldier in his tragic heart attack only days after they made it home and were wed, was more real to her than her own true history. While she was in prison, she received the beginnings of an informal education in crime. She practiced picking pockets in communal spaces, and during long hours when she was confined to her cell, she practiced forging the different signatures that her new friends had scribbled down for her. More importantly, she was taught to avoid repeating the same patterns from the tales of arrest that came to her from every quarter. The truth was that the police preferred not to arrest women if they could avoid it, and only when they were forced into it by flagrant criminality would they take the necessary steps. If she could remain out of sight, change up her robberies to hit different locations, and continue preying on men who were, in the eyes of the police, little more than criminals themselves, then she could get off with exactly the same crimes she had already been charged with forever. When she emerged from prison 4 months later, the simple mistakes that she had made the first time around would never be repeated. With fresh knowledge under her belt about the best ways to ply her various trades, Dorothea hit the streets and set about clawing her way back to the level of wealth and comfort that she had become accustomed to in married life. Some of LA's most successful ladies of the night had given her a crash course in the best stretches of road to pick up custom, the low-rent motels that didn't bother with a hotel detective and let you linger in the lobby until a man came along looking for trade, and even the names and descriptions of the good, bad, and weird clients that might come her way. She relocated herself from Riverside County to the city center, which was in direct violation of her parole, and set to work. She no longer needed to rob her clients to make ends meet, and the police were more than willing to turn their eyes away from a little bit of prostitution, particularly when many prominent members of the force made use of their services. She did steady trade, enough for any other woman to comfortably establish herself in the city, but it was never enough for Dorothea, who immediately spent all of her takings on extravagances: the finest liquors, silk stockings, new dresses, new hats, and meals eaten out every night. She soon developed stable, regular clients in addition to passing trade. There was a certain amount of repetition in her nightly activities, but before the lights were dimmed, she had the kind of exciting, chaotic life that she seemed to crave. She probably would have gone on in that manner until the last of her beauty faded and she had to find gainful employment elsewhere if it weren't for the pregnancy. With no access to a safe abortion and no way to maintain her lifestyle with a bastard in her belly, she was forced to abandon prostitution, at least in the short term. She sought out family members and old foster parents to stay with, mooching as much as she could before being bounced along to the next. Her third child came to term in 1950, and she gave birth in a San Francisco hospital. No name was given as the father on the birth certificate, And when she was asked about the parentage of the baby girl by the adoption agency, she said it was just some man. She hadn't bothered to learn his name, any more than she had considered the consequences of taking the extra $1 from him in exchange for having S with him without a condom. Unknown in San Francisco, she had a much easier time of circumventing local law enforcement, returning to prostitution nominally, but earning the majority of her spending money through theft and check fraud once again. The experiences of her third pregnancy and her dependence on the kindness of others for her own survival had shaken Dorothea. She didn't want to end up in the same situation ever again, so she set out to find economic stability once more through the only means that she had at her disposal. Husband hunting was harder for an older girl who had been through ravages of childbirth, life on the streets, and prison. Dorothea's love for cookery and her long bouts of near starvation as a child had left her with a propensity for overeating, and she was no longer the lithe young blonde turning everyone's heads. It would take her almost 2 years before she could find a new husband. Thank you so much for listening to episode 4 of Buried Beneath the Boarding House. If you're enjoying this true crime series so far, please hit the like button and remember to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Until then, good night.